While Yoda was the Grand Master of the Jedi Order for centuries and one of the wisest and most powerful warriors in the galaxy, he wasn't a perfect Jedi. He didn't know everything and he could indeed be defeated in combat. Yoda was a living being. He made mistakes and learned from them, and he went on making mistakes and learning to the end of his days and beyond. However, some mistakes, some failures occur not in a single moment but over years, and as they're there every day, biding their time, patiently compounding, they're almost impossible to see. Such was the case with the master of the failing Jedi Order on the precipice of the Great Jedi Purge, and it took no less than a spiritual journey to clue Yoda to his ultimate mistake, his ultimate failure, the shadow of his brilliant light.
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
In this video, we're going to explain the 3-episode spiritual journey faced by Yoda in episodes 11, 12, and 13 of Season 6 of Star Wars The Clone Wars as best as we humanly can. To understand the episodes, we must understand the epiphany the Grand Master suffered amidst combat with the Shadow in the Grand Convocation Chamber. And to understand his epiphany, we must understand who Yoda was to the Jedi Order. While obviously not always Grand Master and Master of the Order, two distinct roles, Yoda assumed the former role as early as 82 BBY and had been a Jedi Master for almost 800 years before that. He trained almost every Jedi youngling and took many apprentices, including but not limited to Mace Windu and of course Luke Skywalker. Yoda was a teacher, the ultimate teacher, but as he came to understand, he taught the Jedi Order wrong. Now, Yoda's epiphany didn't just spring into his mind as he was fighting the Shadow, Darth Sidious. It had been brewing inside of him since he first traveled to Dagobah, and the fight was simply when it all clicked into place. Though, in order to understand Yoda's spiritual journey, we must understand just what clicked, and no one describes that very moment better than Matthew Stover in his novelization of Revenge of the Sith. Finally, he saw the truth. This truth that he, the Avatar of Light, Supreme Master of the Jedi Order, the fiercest, most implacable, most devastatingly powerful foe the darkness had ever known, just didn't have it. He'd never had it. He had lost before he started. He had lost before he was born. The Sith had changed. The Sith had grown, had adapted, had invested 1,000 years of intensive study into every aspect of not only the Force but Jedi lore itself in preparation for exactly this day. The Sith had remade themselves. They had become new, while the Jedi had spent that same millennium training to refight the last war. The new Sith could not be destroyed with a lightsaber. They could not be burned away by any touch of the Force. The brighter his light, the darker their shadow. Later, the Grand Master speaks to the Force.
Too old, I was,
Yoda said.
Too rigid, too arrogant to see that the old way is not the only way. These Jedi are trained to become the Jedi who had trained me long centuries ago. But those ancient Jedi of a different time they were. Changed has the galaxy. Changed, the Order did not. Because let it change, I did not.
Considering these two quotes alone, it's clear Yoda's epiphany was about the Jedi Order failing to recognize and adapt to the Sith, though that conclusion doesn't really explain how or why they failed. With insights from the Yoda's spiritual journey, we've ascribed the how and why each to a specific failure. We've ascribed the how to a failure to understand that a brighter light casts a darker shadow. This basically meant that the Jedi Order continued to expand numerically as if to fight a war against an army of Sith, when in reality, the Sith were but two, and for every light emitted by the Jedi Order, those two Sith became ever more powerful, with darkness equal to the Jedi Order's light concentrated inside just the two of them. As we came to see, this allowed the Sith to remain in the same league as the Jedi while remaining hidden from the Jedi, making them much more dangerous when they focused their energy on the galaxy's pressure points. So focused on the war, the Jedi were unable to see the Sith were not actually fighting a war, that the entire thing was a trap. As for the why, we've ascribed it to a failure to empathize and accept the darkness within. This basically meant that instead of teaching Jedi to accept and deal with their emotions, the Jedi Order told them to simply ignore them or let them go. This led the Jedi Order to becoming a stagnant, single-minded entity which, despite what Obi-Wan might have thought, did deal in absolutes and was literally too stubborn to accept that emotions were a part of every living being, that every living being was different, and that it was this difference which allowed a population to adapt to change. The dark side of the Force was no concrete thing, but instead, the very act of using negative emotions to fuel Force powers, thus unbalancing oneself in the Force and becoming almost addicted to negative emotions. Considering this, the Jedi Order's failure to empathize with its own members was also a failure to recognize and actually deal with every Jedi's capacity to fall to the dark side. If you've ever been told to stop being sad or stop being angry, for instance, you know just how infuriating it is, and this was exactly what happened with Anakin Skywalker. If the Jedi Order had simply nurtured him instead of telling him to bottle all his emotions up, he might never have broken the bottle and released them all at once. So that was how and why the Jedi Order failed to recognize and adapt to the Sith, and while all clicked for Yoda in his epiphany, it was seeded in his mind earlier that same year, 19 BBY, while he was on his spiritual journey. Now, we're going to apply what we've discussed to those 3 The Clone Wars episodes. In episode 11, Voices, Yoda heard the voice of Qui-Gon Jinn calling him as a manifestation of the Force, and he told Yoda to travel alone to Dagobah. Arriving, the Force, manifested visually as a swarm of firefly-like creatures and audibly as Qui-Gon, guides Yoda to a cave where he has a vision of Order 66 and the start of the Great Jedi Purge, though it was what Qui-Gon said to him that is of importance to us now.
When will this happen?
It is happening right now. It has always been happening.
I hope that the Jedi can prevail. Is there?
There is always hope, my friend, though it often comes in forms not looked for.
This conversation laid the groundwork for the Grand Master's epiphany, and the most important lines were, "It is happening right now. It has always been happening, and there is always hope, my friend, though it often comes in forms not looked for." The first 2 lines, while not stating it outright, hinted to Yoda that he'd been failing for as long as he'd been a teacher in the Jedi Order, while the 3rd line hinted the Jedi Order was too stagnated to find a path through the darkness, that the Order needed to be destroyed and then rebuilt in a different way. In episode 12, Destiny, Yoda traveled to a planet which was one of the wellsprings of the Force and midichlorians in the galaxy, meeting the 5 priestesses, who deemed him worthy to take 2 spiritual trials. After embarking on the first trial, the priestess Serenity told Yoda he must free himself of the fear inside him, to which Yoda replied,
A Jedi Master I am. Know all that dwells within, I do. Mastered my weaknesses and conquered my fears. I have.
He then entered a storm-shrouded island where he faced a dark mockery of himself in a battle of the body and mind. Losing the battle of the body, the Grand Master realized the enemy he was facing was fear, a negative motion inside of him, and that he did not, in fact, know all which dwelt within him. Yoda accepted that negative emotions were a part of him even if he didn't use them to fuel his Force powers. He accepted that a living being could experience negative emotions without falling to the dark side, but this was only half of the lesson. In his next illusionary trial, Yoda entered the Jedi Temple, where he found dead Jedi and a dying Ahsoka Tano, and he was struck with emotion. Yoda was then approached by a sinister illusion of the Jedi youngling Katuni, who offered to take Yoda away from his confusion, anger, and sadness. She guided him to a place where he would never know pain, never know sadness. A reality where the Clone Wars never happened. The reality presented to Yoda was one of peace and tranquility, the dream reality of the Jedi, but Yoda saw through the illusion, breaking it and passing the trial. Here, he learnt the second half of the lesson, understanding that the Jedi Order's dream of a world without negative emotion, specifically, could never be achieved. In episode 13, Sacrifice, Yoda travelled to the original homeworld of the Sith, Korriban, where he passed the spectres of ancient Sith and entered a Sith temple, waving off the spectre of Darth Bane as well, knowing none of the spectres could harm him. Across the galaxy, a very real Count Dooku and Darth Sidious used Sith sorcery to attack Yoda with an illusion back on Korriban. Yoda saw through their first illusion, but he was then whisked into another, in which he and Anakin Skywalker ultimately ended up in duels against Sidious and Dooku. Yoda watched Anakin behead Dooku, and then both Yoda and Anakin faced Sidious on a high-up walkway. After an intense fight, Sidious cut the walkway, setting up Anakin's unconscious body to slide toward a deadly fall. Yoda used the Force to stop Anakin from falling, but this put him in a position where he had to choose between saving Anakin and sacrificing himself to stop Sidious, or sacrificing Anakin to save himself and having what might have seemed like a better chance to stop Sidious. Here, Yoda realized that the Jedi, during the Clone Wars, had mostly ceased sacrificing themselves for others, as was supposed to be their way, so he chooses to sacrifice himself for Anakin. It's also possible that Yoda, beginning to understand that the Jedi Order needed to be destroyed to be rebuilt in a different way, saved Anakin because he knew on some level that Anakin was the only hope for a new Jedi Order, which we now know was indeed the case through his son, Luke Skywalker, and what came to be the new Jedi Order. Whether this is true or not, Yoda's sacrifice was symbolic of the necessary destruction of the existing Jedi Order. So really, Yoda had most of the parts for his epiphany by the end of his 3-episode spiritual journey. He understood that all living beings had negative emotion inside of them and that outright rejecting that emotion was wrong in the episode Destiny. And the other episodes, Voices and Sacrifice, he at least began to understand that the Jedi Order must be destroyed and rebuilt in a different way. Otherwise, it could never see its only path through the darkness. That pathed by Luke Skywalker and walked by the new Jedi Order. The Grand Master just needed all of those parts to click into place. So, what do you think of our explanations of episodes 11, 12, and 13 of Season 6 of The Clone Wars? And let me know what you think of that Yoda impression. It made me laugh a bit too hard and it absolutely destroyed my throat, so please have mercy. Anyways guys, are you less confused or more confused after this video? If you're more confused, chuck a comment below and we'll try to respond to it. Also, would you like to see a video on how the Jedi Order was actually rebuilt after it was destroyed? I.e. a video like this one, but focusing on Luke Skywalker and the new Jedi Order instead? Let us know in the comment section below. And just before you go, make sure you check out all those links in the description below waiting for your clicks, including our Geetsly's Gaming Network, our main Discord, and our Patreon. Anyways guys, as always, thank you so much for watching and I hope to see you in the next video.